We've talked about this issue before.
Yes, David.
And I just saw somebody sent me something as American Society of Civil Engineers rates overall our infrastructure, overall, not just water, but infrastructure, at a D+. Are we making any progress?
We are making progress, but not quickly enough. Most of the investment, especially in water and wastewater, took place in the 1940s and 50s following World War II. So it's coming end of life, and a lot of cities and municipalities simply don't have the money to invest in their infrastructure. They're busy funding pensions, and they're busy with firefighters, police officers, building schools, all the important things that cities have to do.
So tell us how your company fits into that, because you largely, I think, are state-controlled utilities, and you just deliver water and you take care of wastewater. Do you build the infrastructure, or does the city or the state build the infrastructure?
So our business model is we are a regulated utility, similar to electrics and gas. We are regulated by state public service commissions. We invest the money ourselves. We have excellent access to capital markets. American Water's S&P A credit rated. This year alone, we will invest about $1.7 billion just in infrastructure in our service area of water and wastewater. And then when you look at the municipal systems that we're buying because they're distressed, we're buying 19. That's another $200 million we're projecting just this year.
So you have access to the capital markets. You put the money in, but you have to get the money back. You have to get a return on your investment. Are the regulators open to you passing along some of the costs to the rate holders, the ratepayers?
They are, David, because water is a critical human need. So in terms of water supply, and we've seen states where that's been an issue, water quality, the issue of emerging contaminants, no one wants to be the next city that has had problems with their water quality. And water infrastructure is very key. So we're investing. We also are seeing an increased need for resiliency investment. What I mean by that, in the Northeast, as you know, the past 10 to 12 years, we've had 6 100-year floods. We're building our systems now to 500-year floodplain specifications. So we've got to get this right before we are faced with flooding or hurricanes or ice storms.
We're talking with Susan Story. She's the CEO of American Water Works. You mentioned about contaminants in water. We obviously have the Flint story. My hometown, actually, is Flint, Michigan. But also Newark, we've had, and various other places. How bad a problem is that?
So, interestingly, there are 144 million chemicals registered globally, and every 2.5 seconds they're breaking down into substances, some of which we don't know what they are. We can't regulate all of those. The EPA regulates 100. We must have more and more research into how do we deal with these contaminants. At our company, we have an R&D group with 15 scientists. We're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to start doing predictive profiles of chemicals and biologics so that we can stop any type of contamination event before it ever happens.
So we may not be catching up the way we should on the infrastructure investment, but your company specifically has been doing pretty well financially. You're doing all right. How much of that is because of an increased awareness of environmental, social, governance issues, the so-called ESG?
That is a great point. Actually, even though we're a U.S. company, around 28% of our stock is owned by international investors. This year alone, I've done 4 international investor trips by demand. Typically, I do 1 or 2, and it's because these ESG principles are so strong, and to have a regulated utility that has a highly sustainable image and scores very highly in ESG there's a lot of demand from an investor standpoint for that.
So you know this area so terribly well, unlike most of the rest of us. What needs to be done, and who needs to do it to really have us catch up to where we need to be in infrastructure? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it local? Is it private enterprise? How do we get there?
It's all of the above, David. Water and sanitation services are so critical. One particular group can't make these solutions. So we're working with federal agencies, we're working with state governments, we're working with local municipalities. We share a lot of our research. We're partnering with EPA and Centers for Disease Control to say, here are the key issues. PFAS, for example, there's not just lead, a lot of press about PFAS, the chemicals that once they get into the body can't get rid of them. So we need to find solutions and treatment that then everyone can utilize.
So give us a sense of how concentrated your business is. As I say, you're the largest, most geographically diverse. How big is the second largest? Is this a few large players nationally, or are there a lot of smaller companies?
Investor-owned water utilities, there are only 8. Investor-owned, we are half the whole market size of the entire 8. The next largest water utility is a little less than 2 times or a little more than 2 times our size, and the rest are $3 to $4 billion market cap and below.
You said investor-owned. So if you take the whole marketplace, investor-owned and publicly owned, What percentage are investor owned?
So investor owned are about 15% of water and 2% of wastewater. Municipals run 84% of water and they run 98% of wastewater at this point.
To what extent is regulation helping or hurting you? Because we know that there's a clean water case that was just argued yesterday in the Supreme Court, and the Trump administration wants to dial back on some of the regulation. Is that helpful to you from your point of view?
We are advocates for strong water quality standards. And what we have found with the Environmental Protection Agency is there's a lot of support for us to keep those water standards up in terms of drinking water.
Fascinating. What's your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge always is making sure that there's not a contamination event and that we are at the forefront of cyber protection.